Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is At the Helm Sports. I am your host, Derek Helm. Thank you for joining me for episode 134. Please be sure to follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave those 5-star reviews. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button. Down in the comments section, let me know. Who are you going this week, Scotty or the field at the U.S. Open? Because basically it seems like that's the only decision we need to make anymore. So leave that down in the comments. But this week we will be previewing the U.S. Open. As of recording this, the Sunday round of the Memorial has not started yet, so we don't know what happened there. But we're going to dive into the U.S. Open, go through the course, go through all the golfers, and basically what we're thinking here. And joining me, I have Ben Rasa, and coming off a big win yesterday, huh?
Yeah, man. The ponies treated me well, which is fun. That's found money, but now I'm excited to hop on U.S. Open. Doesn't get much better than this in the golf world.
Yeah, I'm definitely excited. You know, we've had, it seems like some ups and downs this year with just, some nobody's winning and then Scotty just dominating. So it's like, sometimes I'm fully engaged and sometimes I'm like, this is just ridiculous.
I hear that. Yeah, I mean, it's been. You already mentioned it. We're what 1 minute in. It's step one in all these decisions. It's just you have Scotty Scheffler and you have everyone else, and that's going to be, I'm sure, a talking point when we break this down.
Yeah, and as I said, the Memorial hasn't commenced, but I'm sure by the time people are listening to this, he's already won it by 5 strokes.
Yep.
So, and it's nice. I could have used a 146 to 1 yesterday because obviously I bet Hovland, and then also you'll appreciate this. I got the Louis experience on Live, so bet him also, and that was a fun withdrawal.
I know it all too well. It's good to see that he's carried his game and his traits over to Live. But yeah, I saw the Rom thing as well. There's a lot happening in the golf world for a prequel to a major. A lot of storylines.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess we could start there. What do you think with Rom? I mean, we don't have a ton of information, but do you think it was more precautionary so he can play this week, or do you think that it's actually an issue?
So my default position on these things is when in doubt, the week before a major, I believe that most guys are like, even if there's a 1% chance this is something, let me just stop. Decky withdrew before like majors and previously, and then he's fine. I would hope he's fine. And then it always brings up, when we start to dive into pricing, there's always that game theory. Even if it is something, if no one's willing to use Rom, am I willing to say, well, I'll use him and take a shot that he can still kind of have that game? But I'd be lying if I wasn't a little concerned. It seemed like something, but I still think he ultimately plays. That's my default position right now.
Yeah, that would be my guess too. I mean, it did look like he was grimacing a little bit from time to time on some of those swings, but it's just a cut on his foot. I mean, I really don't see that holding him out from playing in a major. Now, maybe how everybody's really mean to him now, and he gets a little bit upset about that. Maybe his feelings are a little bit more hurt than the foot, so maybe he uses that as an excuse not to show up.
It's Yeah, I mean, there's always levels to it too, because it's like, okay, step one, obviously, is he going to play? If the answer is yes, he still has to play. Like he can play and shoot 9 over, and that's not going to really help us.
Yep.
So he wasn't exactly tearing it up. When we've seen him beforehand, it's fascinating. It's one of the many, as we said, storylines heading into this U.S. Open.
Yeah, absolutely. So we might as well dive into it. We could start off with going through the course, basically break that down, and then we could jump into the player pool. But we're playing at Pinehurst number 2. This is the 4th time hosting a US Open. Last time we saw it was 2014. Martin Keimer won with a score of 9 under, which basically seemed like he was playing an entirely different course because second place was Fowler and Compton, and they were at -1. They were the only other two under par. So you had Keimer at 9 under and only 2 other guys under par. So he ran away with it there. Now, I do think it'll play a little bit different. Obviously that was 10 years ago. We have huge advancements in technology and just the ability of these golfers. And I do think that there haven't been a ton of changes to the course, but I do think it will play a little bit different from there. And any thoughts on what we saw in 2014 and how it might compare to this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always, you mentioned it kind of feels like exponential growth in the golf world in terms of what players are able to deal with. Obviously, the distance has been a hot topic. And so I always try to balance of like, okay, we have seen this course. Yes, it was a long time ago, but what are the focal points? Does it play to a true US Open? And then where are the differences? It's not just going to be a repeat of what we saw there. It rarely is. So to me, it'll still have, you can't be hitting it into the thick stuff and expect to get away with it. But at the same time, I'm starting to really force myself to say these guys can score anywhere and they will score. There will be players who are able to find some birdie attempts even on a very difficult layout like Pinehurst.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I think over the last 10 years that we've saw is, it's still a US Open. It's going to play incredibly difficult, but they've kind of scaled it back a little bit where, it used to be the goal was to not have anybody under par, whereas now we're seeing it a little bit not easy scoring conditions, but a little bit easier than what the USGA used to set it up as.
I miss that, not gonna lie. I like when it's just out of control.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it hasn't been that, and I think, of course, if we get it we're talking on Sunday, if there's crazy winds, if there's torrential something bizarre, it could play crazy, but if it's pretty straight up and it's standard weather, I do think you're gonna see guys with the ability to post some numbers. Not, we're not going to Trinity Forest at 30 under or anything, but it's not gonna be where, you post even and you win the US Open. I think those days might be behind us.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, we're definitely going to see some variance here. I do think you could see some guys that are maybe getting to -6, -8, and then maybe a couple guys -4, -1 under par, and then I could see a large amount over par. So it's going to be probably a little bit of both.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's going to play tough. I don't want to say that this is going to be an easy challenge, but I do think it'll be a gettable one. And then when I always like to build backwards of what ideally would I want my golfer to do. Usually at majors, you end up, or at least I end up sounding like an idiot because I'm like, I want good drivers who got their irons, going. They can scramble and they can putt. Yeah, that sounds perfect. Just find a super golfer, but it does feel like another well-rounded test.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pinehurst is a Donald Ross designed 7,550 yard par 70 with champion underdwarf Bermuda greens. Going to play very firm and fast. There's 117 bunkers on the course, and one of the unique things about this is there is no rough. Basically, you miss the fairway, and you're playing out of a native area. So it could be sand, it could be various types of different grass. You could be behind a huge plant. You could be close to some of these pine trees that are there. So it's going to be very interesting. Not every missed fairway is going to be the same, and it's going to place a huge emphasis on accuracy off of the tee. Now, one of the things that they did change from 2014 is you're probably going to hear it quite a bit this week is the wire grass, very thick, tall grass. They've added more of it to basically the landing areas off the tee. So that could come into play quite a bit. We might see some guys basically hitting just off of a little bit of sand and might have a great look, whereas other guys might be right behind that wire grass and might have to punch out sideways. So at a bare minimum, I think accuracy off the tee is one of the main things we're going to have to look at this week.
Yeah, and you mentioned already like the variance that comes into play in US. So that's it right there. Like two equally bad drives, and your second shots can look 100, completely different. One guy is able to basically punch out sideways, and the other can, maybe run it up to the green. And I think that's just something that we want to limit where we have to get lucky there, and total driving, strokes gained off the tee without distance emphasized are things that I think we can right off the bat maybe look to try to avoid some of those potentially hazardous lies.
Absolutely. So the course has two par fives, four par threes, 12 par fours. The par fives are pretty long, probably not really reachable by a lot of golfers, depends on what the setup is, but probably not going to give up a ton of eagles, but you definitely will see some birdie chances there. So definitely want to take advantage of the par fives. I think the par threes are going to play a big part this week. They're really long and difficult. I mean, we have one that's basically 245 yards. It's going to play as the longest of the par threes, and it's pretty difficult. So we're going to see a lot of guys basically just having to tread water on those holes, maybe attempt to score on the par fives, and then the par fours aren't really a cakewalk either. I mean, we've got 3 of them over 500 yards, 5 of them from 450 to 500. Then you have 2 from 400 to 450 and 2 from 350 to 400. So they're going to play pretty difficult as well. In 2014, we saw 11 holes boasting a bogey rate of over 20%, and 4 of those holes were over 30%. So it is going to play difficult. It's going to be very, very strategic. You're basically going to have to decide, when to go for scoring opportunities and when to just take your medicine.
That's always that's one of the things I do love about the US Open, that fascinating, like, who's able to pick and choose, like you mentioned, those spots. You have a real good drive, you've got a medium length iron. Is this a time to attack? Is it a time to try to get it to 25 feet and take your two putts and know you're going to pick up strokes against the field, but can you steal even more? And I do think on some of the shorter par fours, certainly the par fives, you're going to have to try to get short irons in your hand and attack, because the par threes, I think, realistically, you're trying to hold on and just limit the damage.
Yep. Yeah, so as I said, accuracy off the tee is an absolute must here. The fairways are a little bit easier to hit than tour average, a little bit wider, but you know, at most US Opens, we see distance is an absolute must. I don't want to say that it's not necessary here, but I do think that some of the shorter hitters, especially if it's playing really firm and fast, and we might even see a lot of the bigger hitters even club down just to make sure they're in the fairway. But you could probably get a good amount of run out here. I mean, we saw it with Martin Keimer in 2014 is if you're hitting these fairways, it kind of mitigates the distance if you're not as long off the tee.
I like that too. It brings a lot of different skill sets. When we talk about lineup construction, I think you can stack some of those type of players that maybe do similar things. And it's nice to say, okay, it's not a prerequisite that you need to carry at 315 over all this trouble. You can do it a couple different ways. And I think we're going to see a leaderboard that resembles a very wide ranging skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with that. Usually at the US Open that there's guys that you can just immediately write off because
Yep.
they don't have the distance. Whereas here, it opens it up a lot more to the field. So I think regardless of the skill set, you're going to have to hit the long irons pretty well. I mean, I'd say the bulk, maybe even 60% of the shots are probably coming from 175 yards and up. Probably a lot of them 200 plus yards. So, with that, you want guys that are pretty dialed in with the long irons, and they're going to be missing greens when you're hitting from that far out, even if you're playing from the fairway. We have the typical Donald Ross upside down bowl shape, so there's going to be plenty of runoff on these greens, and they're probably going to be pretty hard to stick running off into these collection areas. So definitely want the long irons. Definitely going to have a very good around the green game here, because going to be chipping off of these tight lies in these collection areas, or possibly some native areas. So we're going to definitely need to see some creativity around the greens. And even I've heard some people say, with firm and fast greens, you want the guys with the high ball flight. But the issue with that is if these are really that firm and they're going to be hard to hit greens, and you're hitting from further away, it might even be harder to stick some of these greens. So some guys, as we talked about strategically, maybe even playing a link style and trying to hit it and run it up there. That might even come into play quite a bit here.
Which is always, I think, to me, fascinating, kind of like the art versus science of, when I think of links golf and I think of European golf, I think of guys having shots that you can't really practice. You have to get up and down from some bizarre lies. You get some weird bounces, things like that. And I think Pinehurst can bring some of that to the table, where it's going to be, I have an awkward distance. Can I limit, even if it's for bogey? Can I just hold the round together? Not everything's going to be clean. And I think that we'll see, obviously Scotty does it better. Even, I know we're talking on a Sunday, he made mistakes, at Memorial, and yet you look at his round, he's able to extend because he finds a way to mask them, to limit them. And I think that is always the theme of a US Open. Just don't magnify your mistakes, really try to limit them. And if you do that, you'll have a chance on Sunday.
Yeah, and when you're playing a difficult course, it's hard enough to make a good shot. But then when you have 3 separate shots that you could possibly go with, that comes into play even more so.
And I love that. Like, it's not as straightforward. You mentioned, will some really aggressive drivers club down off the tee and say, okay, I'll take a longer iron in for a higher chance at a fairway, or I'm going to just say, I'm going to hit it as far as I can. I'll take the lie that I get, and I think I can control maybe a shorter iron. I love that challenge where it's not just everyone has one way to win. It's not like that at all.
Yeah, it's going to be. I mean, forget round to round, from shot to shot. We're going to see so much variance, and that definitely makes it very, very interesting going into this. So another strategy could possibly be putting from off the greens. I mean, we saw Keimer do it quite a bit in 2014. So maybe the Texas wedge, and instead of chipping, now it's possible that maybe the edge of these greens are a little bit longer, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to do so. But that's definitely going to come into play here. And what we saw in 2014 also was guys were three putting a lot. So not only do you need an around the green game, but you need to be able to putt on these fast Bermuda greens, and got to be good with lag putting, and definitely avoid the three putts as well.
It's going to be crucial. I mean, that's not worse than, you're like, all right, my guy can steal birdie here at 25 feet. And now it's 6.5 feet for par. And now we're tapping in not for par. And that is a killer, and certainly going to have to make I'm, when you look at the winner, he's going to do a lot of good things, but I can almost guarantee inside 10 feet, they're going to be almost automatic. You have to make those because you're going to have those testers for par, and you need to hold your round together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we might even see it where guys are having to make those to avoid a double or even a
Yep.
triple on some holes. So it's going to be really interesting. Definitely, I would say the most important things I'm looking at are accuracy off the tee, a strong around the green game, and good putting. And some other guys might be able to come into play with their ball striking if they have a ceiling round or two, but overall, that's basically what I'm looking at, is the accuracy off the tee and the around the green and on the greens finesse.
I like that. I think that lends itself to a couple different players that we'll get to, and then you mentioned the flip side. I always think you can take the shot, and you're running maybe a little close to the sun of a guy's a bad scrambler, but he hits a lot of greens in regulation, and I'm going to bet that he can mask it. And if he has really good ball striking, he won't be tested as much. But the U.S. Open, and to think that he can completely get away with it is probably a little far fetched. So you can look to the pure ball strikers, but if you have no around the green game whatsoever, I do think ultimately you'll be exposed this week.
Absolutely. All right, so we can dive into the field, and as I said at the top, it starts with Scotty. I mean, unless you're living under a rock, obviously he is the cream of the crop here. Basically, probably going to run away with the Memorial. It's just, this seems like basically built for Scotty. I mean, everything we said is exactly what Scotty does, even from the strategy standpoint. So it's going to be very hard to not get there. I mean, 13,000. It's probably not high enough. So I mean, honestly, this might be a week where you can consider lock button on Scotty.
I mean, I would never, the only pushbacks on Scotty are, to me, game theory decisions. There's nothing in his game where you're going to look and be like, I'm certainly not going to point out any flaws in the game. I think it's mostly, what do you think of lineup construction? Now they open it up to the 5K range. In majors, it makes it a lot easier to get to someone who's 13,000 when you can dip. He's going to be extremely popular. He should be extremely popular. I think the decision's always going to be, whatever you choose, just know what you're doing in the terms of the leverage. And what I mean by that is, like, if you're like, oh, I like Scotty, I'm going to play 40%. That's not going to do anything. Like, if you really like him, you may have to get to 70, 80% to have a big position, because the field is going to be there, and that is a certainty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say at this point, 40% is probably the low end of what he's going to be
That's
owned. I don't see
crazy.
it coming much less than that. So yeah, I would say 60% Scotty at the least if you're going to play him, because as you said, you get no leverage match in the field, and then you also have to be cognizant of who of the cheap guys you're putting in there, because if everybody else is using the same guys, it's and we have a tough test here. How many 5K guys do you really want to jam into a lineup here too? So some of the balance builds are definitely going to look better pre-tournament, and it's going to be a decision to make. But I mean, maybe a 60-40 split might be something to consider here. But what do you think? Do you think there's a case for playing Rory over him this week, other than game theory?
I mean, My credibility with Rory is it's beyond shot. Yeah, I always think that just because. So the part I being completely trying not to be biased and whatnot, the US Open is not the Masters where it's like, okay, unless you really, really screw up, you're gonna make that cut. Like good players get cut all the time at the US Open. I'm not saying Scotty Scheffler is gonna get cut, but if you were gonna miss one, this in the Open, there's a lot of weird stuff that can happen. So when you get to, because I don't think you're wrong, the ownership could be pushing half your field as a 13K guy, and then the attachments to him are going to be a handful of players in a certain salary range at the bottom who also could easily get cut. So I do think you want to explore balance builds. I certainly will be, but at this point, unless you're really, really dangerous, I don't know how you have. Like I'm going to have Scotty certainly in the pool in a healthy amount, even if I don't have a crazy position on him, because he's just, I mean, he's that good at this point. There's no denying it.
Absolutely. Yeah, when it comes to Rory, I don't know if I'm going to get there. You want Rory more on driver heavy courses. And as we
Agreed.
said, if guys are going to be clubbing down, I do think that he could do it, but I don't think he wants to. And we've seen him get a little bit wild here off the tee. And it's odd because he looks like vintage Rory. He looks like one of the best golfers in the world. And then all of a sudden he'll just have something where you're like, what the hell was that?
Oh yeah, I know that. I know that all too well. With him, it's and that's the thing. I don't think it has to be an either or this week by any stretch. You know, you've got
Yeah.
Scotty, and then you've got, yeah, sure, you could go to Rory, but you could go very balanced too. There's going to be a lot of options, kind of as we work down. So do I think, you know, Rory, he shows glimmers of it and flashes of it, and he has everything that I want. Just haven't seen it really put together, certainly in a major in quite some time, in terms of hoisting a trophy. It's going to have to be a pretty big ownership gap. I'll say that much. Like I want like 1/4 the ownership, 1/3 the ownership of Scotty. If they're even remotely close, I'd have to go with Scheffler at this point, but I don't think they will be.
Yeah. Now, Xander, obviously, he just won his first major, and after not being able to ever do that, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities that he goes back to back in majors. And I know that sounds crazy with Xander, but I do think that this is a good setup for him. And obviously, he's outside of Scotty, basically been the best golfer in the world this year. So I think you get a safety and a floor with Xander, but you also do have the upside here. And at $1,500 less than Scotty, I do think he'll be pretty popular as well.
I think this is probably the second most natural starting point if you don't go Scotty. I think most
Yep.
people will skip Rory and start with Xander. He gains reliably off the tee. I always, before obviously now he's got one, but when I used to think of him, it's consistency. It's consistency in U.S. Opens. He's thrived at these type of layouts his entire career. He makes a lot of sense. I don't know if you're going to be able to. I'm just kind of playing around. If you double jam, that's going to be almost impossible. If you have Scheffler and Xander, you're in the low sixes for 4. That's a tough ask. I think people may try it, but yeah, Xander's an excellent starting point. A lot of people will do that.
Yeah, and I think that only works too if it's basically, let's say Scotty runs away with it and wins by 5, and Xander is actually the one behind him, and
Yep.
then maybe the rest of the field struggles a little bit. Then you could see that pay off. But then what are your other 4 golfers looking like in that? So I would think if you did want to go that build, you'd probably have to allocate a good amount of lineups to it. And I don't know if that's something a lot of people are going to want to do.
It's just so tough because, like you mentioned, you're almost trying to hit an exact at the top with those two. Then you need 4 guys that are probably slightly less than coin flips to all make the cut, even if they don't
Yeah.
grab a ton of placement points. That's a big ask because there's not that much down there.
Yep. And then we get to Rom, obviously, up in the air right now, what's even going on with him. I think even if he was coming in fully healthy, even if he won Live Houston, I think he's by far the lowest owned up here. So we talk about game theory. That's going to be a big one. I bit the bullet at the PGA Championship. I made the outright on him. I played a bunch of him in DraftKings, and he just does not look like himself. It does not seem like he is happy on Live at all. I mean, his pockets definitely are, but mentally he just seems like a mess.
It's not good. I'm with you. I thought that was a really interesting against the grain play there, and I don't, when you do those, you're supposed to get burned. That's the whole natural. That's why they're lower owned, like because the risk is immense. And I think here is going to be the same thing. If I can get leverage with a 10% allocation of ROM, I will strongly consider that. There's no doubt about it. I'm willing to sacrifice those type of percentages. But I mean, it's undeniable that of all the guys at the top, he carries, I think, clearly the most risk coming into the tournament.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question with that. Next, I mean, this is going to be an interesting one. Bryson DeChambeau, 10,100, I think is a great price for him. I don't think the setup is really strong for Bryson, but this is another guy that is very strategic. And if he decides to, I mean, he could hit 5-iron on every tee and be just as long as half these guys. So if he actually makes a conscious effort to go accuracy over distance, I mean, he's a great putter. I do think that he could actually play well here if he chooses the right strategy.
It's all about, with Bryson, when it's good, it's amazing. When he gets, to me, off track at these places, it's hard for him to rein it back. Just look at his US Open results. Winged foot, that was an incredible strategy and an incredible showing. Then you have other ones where you're just like, this guy is forcing a strategy that's simply not going to work here. So I definitely have interest because he strategically thinks like you said, and I like that about him. But it's probably going to have to be a starting point, which I think is fascinating. Like Bryson's an aggressive second man. He's a pretty balanced first man, and he gives you a lot of salary to work with.
Yeah, and as far as ownership goes, I think, with the performance we saw at the PGA Championship, we get a little bit more casuals during the majors. So maybe if you're playing the Millie Maker or some of the bigger tournaments, I think his ownership might be a little bit more elevated. But then people that follow golf a lot more closely probably don't really like him for this course. So I think depending on the contest you're playing is really going to determine what his ownership ends up at.
And you see that with Bryson. I think he's always a someone that for a lot of different groups within the contest lobby have different narratives with him and just the way he plays, his results. And with the live guys in general, I think most people who flock into the majors really only look at them major to major. Like, oh, Bryson's been good because he was good the last time I saw him. And Rom is bad because he was bad the last time I saw him, which is somewhat true, but there are obviously some form in between that I'm not sure everyone looks at.
Yeah, and it's funny too with Bryson. We've seen all these guys go to live and just get hated, and people dislike them. And he's the one guy that's gone there and
Yeah,
actually become more popular because everybody hated him before he left, and now I don't know. Maybe it's because they're seeing less of him. So I don't know, but it's funny.
it's true. It's yeah, Bryson in spurts works, man. Like once every couple months, give me some Bryson, and I think everyone's happy.
Yeah. So next we have Kepka. Obviously, he's been a major hunter, has won US Opens before. 10,000 I think is a good price for him, but he doesn't seem like himself so far this year. We say he's a major killer, but came 45th at the Masters, absolutely ejected on Saturday at the PGA Championship. I had the outright on him there and just I don't know what happened that Saturday, but ended up finishing 26th. So not great there either. And then even on live, I mean, he's been okay. He won in Singapore, but otherwise it's like every week you don't really know what's going to show up, and the putter seems to be letting him down too. So I always want to play Kepka, especially at a US Open, but I don't know if I'm going to get there this year.
Yeah, I mean Brooks has proven certain me wrong many a times at US Opens with he's another guy. He has a formula. He knows what he's doing, he knows what it takes. Having said that, I don't think he's on the list right now for me. I would actually just again, we're very early, but if you told me gut feel, I would find $100 and I would play Bryson. There's a bunch of guys in the nines that I would rather play. You can't play everybody. There are good players that you have to get under on just by the nature of the field. And for me, Brooks is probably going to be one of those.
Yeah, I agree. And if it comes down to Wednesday and all of a sudden it looks like the sentiment around Brooks is a little bit less, then that probably changes things. Because as you said, one of his reasons for so much success at a U.S. Open is that strategy. He knows when to go for it. He knows when to just tread water. So definitely can make cases for him, but probably strictly going to be an ownership play for me. Next, we have Victor Hovland, 9,800. Now, played much, much better at the PGA Championship, finishing third, was playing incredible this week within one stroke. And then what the hell happened to him yesterday? That was insane.
Hovland, man, is I don't know what to do with him. Obviously, at the PGA, we saw if his around the green game is just flat or even slightly good, I mean, the rest of the game is amazing. It's just so far we've mentioned mostly, Rahm is playing bad, but we've mentioned really well-rounded players. Then you get to Hovland, and if you look at any stats, you're just like, whoa, this guy's got an area of his game that can be exposed, and it is around the green. He struggled with it for a while, struggled with it in 2024, and I worry about that. And then you mentioned even at Memorial, it's he's trending, and then all of a sudden, boom, and that is troublesome. Again, a very balanced starting point. Second man in if you're aggressive. Pretty neutral on Hovland though to get the week started. To be honest.
Yeah, with the amount you're going to have to rely around the green, he's probably going to be a write off for a lot of people. And even if he gets way down there in ownership, he tends to show up at the majors, but I don't know. It's going to be a hard sell for me. As far as Ludwig Oberg goes, 9,600. I think this kid is the real deal. I really, really like him, not necessarily for this course, but I think his game translates anywhere. I mean, he hits it long and straight. We talked about possibly hitting the Texas wedge and putting off of these greens. I definitely think he's capable of that. He's a very good putter. Obviously, at the Memorial, he's shown that the knee's not that much of an issue. So I love Oberg quite probably going to play quite a bit of him.
I'm with you. It seems more and more this is a whole different conversation, but like there's not as much of you have to build up to it with these guys. Like they come in and they're just ready to win. They're ready to play. They don't like, oh, it's his first major, second major. These guys, they know what they're doing. Yeah, he doesn't have a ton of experience in courses like this in US Opens, of course, but he just shows up. And what I like about him when I look at some of the performances, it's not one type of course. Like he went to the Players and he top 10. He was fine at Heritage technical layouts.
Yep.
Then, you go to other places completely different, Farmers, things like that. Super effective there. He's got the game. You mentioned it. It just translates. It's a kind of you can mold it into anything. The knee seems okay. I will be over on him as well.
Yeah, it's a great price, and I do think his game translates anywhere. So next we have Colin Morikawa, 9,400. Now, I bet Morikawa at the Memorial. He is in incredible form. I don't think you really like him at most U.S. Open venues, but I do think this is one that plays to his strong suits. He's a guy that's absolutely going to live in the fairways, despite the fact that he's been losing with the irons most of the year. We have seen those come back to the norm a little bit more over the past couple weeks. So I do like that. And he's gained incredibly off the tee and around the greens. So I do think that this setup actually fits Morikawa quite a bit. I have not made any wagers for the US Open yet, but he is one I'm considering at I think I saw him at 21 to 1. And I do think that if he puts up a good Sunday round, that number could actually go down. I know he's 18 in some spots. So I might take the 21, maybe even as soon as we get off of this podcast.
Yeah, I get it, man. Morikawa, there's a couple guys like this. I feel like for me, and I'm just kind of thinking on the fly here, like Fitzy. What I always thought was fascinating with him, he added a lot of distance, and then it finally came together and translated. And Morikawa, he's such a good iron player, but those have been not what's carried him. It's been better off the tee, better around the green. What happens if the irons come back? Now he's got a much more well-rounded game, and I do think we've seen some of that. So I kind of like when a player, I don't want to say struggles with their best, because I just feel more confident of positive regression with Morikawa's irons than say Hovland's chipping, where it's like, why would that
Absolutely.
regress? He's not a good chipper of the ball, where Morikawa is a great iron player. And for that, he is very interesting this week.
Yeah, and two of the main things I'm looking at are fairways and around the green. He's second in fairways gain and second around the green over the last 24 rounds. So it's just the way he's playing right now. It seems perfect, and I do expect him to be pretty popular. I think it's a cheap price for him, but I don't care. I'll be playing ton of Morikawa, and I'll probably have the outright on him. Now, Cantlay has not been good at all. I think this is a blatant misprice, 9,200. You're probably going to get a low ownership on him, but I mean, he's just been awful. He had third and fourth places at the Heritage and Genesis. Those are places he tends to play well, but other than that, he's finished outside the top 25 6 times in 11 tournaments, and he's only gained strokes on approach in 3 of them. So Cantlay is just a straight up write off for me.
Me as well. You mentioned a couple places he always plays well. Memorial's one of them too, and he was awful.
Yeah.
So that's I'm really worried. I was able to short him successfully at Memorial. And yes, if you're looking for a low ownership play, he's your guy, but I would never back a player just because they're low owned. That's a bonus of a guy that I think has potential upside. Cantlay's not one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Wyndham Clark, obviously reigning US Open champion. I do think that this is a course that could fit him, but he just has not been good lately either. Obviously he won the shortened Pebble Beach, had 2 runner-up finishes at API and Players, came third at the Heritage. So we've seen some good golf from him, but over the past couple weeks, it just has not looked good. 47th at Wells Fargo, missed the cut at the PGA, missed the cut this week at the Memorial. So, it doesn't really matter to me how much you look like you could suit a course. If you're not playing well coming into a US Open, I don't know if I can back you.
It's really difficult to kind of at any major, but particularly US Open, to be like this guy's going to get right here. Like he's going to figure it out on the fly here. And I think that Wyndham Clark is searching a little bit. The strokes gain data is all over the place. He leaks with the irons, then he gains, then he leaks with this. The putting is always consistent, but that's a huge ask to say like, oh, I'm going to come to the US Open, not in form and find it. So volatile, but again, I try to be realistic and not just say, oh, I'll play him as well. I don't see myself getting to Wyndham Clark.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough sell. And he does. He rates out very well. I mean, if you look at him on fast and firm courses, if you look at him on difficult courses, it looks like this would be a good place for him. But just with the way he's been playing, I got to stay away. Justin Thomas, 8,900. I don't know what to do with JT because I do think this could be a good course for him. He's started to play better here recently after a little lull earlier in the season. The problem has really been the putter. I mean, he just similar to what I said with Rory. It'll just be like he's going along and you're like, oh, this is vintage JT. He looks great. And then all of a sudden he'll just have one of those blow up holes where it's like, what the hell was that? And you can't do that at a US Open.
He has been a pain point for me all year. I can't seem to time it. I was talking with some people over at Stochastic earlier before the Memorial, and I was saying I could see a world where JT wins Memorial and wins the US Open. He's primed and he's not going to win Memorial unless he shoots 45 today, and I'd say that's doubtful. So I don't know what to make of him. I'm one of the last JT truthers out there where I see flashes of it, but he is playing a little whack-a-mole too, where he strikes it well and then he can't putt. He's saving for bogey with 20 footers, but what is this driving? And I worry about that. Price is reasonable. He's not going to be your first man in. I like that. And he can grind, but he's probably going to be on the card. I'll be honest. I'm probably going to get him in the pool. I just don't know how I can confidently deploy him, though. He's a very big risk reward play.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am. As of right now, I'm probably going to play him. I do think his creativity around the green will come into play. And the fact that, you don't need to go 15 under. Maybe the blow up holes, if everybody's having them, don't mean as much. So I'm definitely willing to take a chance on him. And I'm right there with you. I mean, last year when he was absolutely terrible, I just kept telling myself, well, eventually the old JT is going to show up. He can't be this bad for this long. And it cost me a good amount of money.
Yeah, I hear that.
So Cam Smith, I think, is somebody that absolutely is in play here. 8,700. Obviously, a wizard around and on the greens. He's been pretty good from on live. Has second place finishes at Singapore and Hong Kong. Otherwise, it's kind of hit or miss. Right now, I believe he's in the top 20 at Live Houston, so playing all right. But I do think that if he was ever going to win a U.S. Open, this is probably the venue to do it at. Now, obviously, it's concerning how wild he gets off the tee, and that can get you in a lot of trouble here. But he's a guy that knows how to get out of trouble. So at 8,700, I definitely like his prospects.
Yeah, Cam Smith is always a tough one for me because I don't know how he does it, but it's not luck either. You mentioned his game, he knows his game well, and that means that he's going to drive it in places where you're just like, well, that's it. And he's the best at getting out of that because he's done it so many times. And he has a formula. I mean, the guy I'll always think about, he won at the Players and he bled strokes off the tee like you wouldn't believe that week because he can do that at times. You don't want that, but it's just the way he plays. So it will be more skill set centric for me. Like when I play Cam Smith, I probably will look to different types of players than if I
Yep.
start with like a Bryson. I think that would be a different type of build, but I totally get how Cam Smith is in the pool this week.
And he could be potentially a second man in on Scotty lineups. And
Yeah.
I don't know that he's going to be incredibly popular. So that is possibly a second man in on those lineups.
I see that.
Homa at 8,600, he's been up and down all year and just recently not playing well. Tends to show up at courses where he's shown up well before and starting to play a little bit better at majors at the Open and we saw him play well at the Masters, but as I said with Wyndham Clark, you're not playing well coming in. I don't think I can get there. At the Memorial, he's been okay, but I don't think Homa's for me this week.
Type of player where if Max Homa beats me, I kind of just have to live with that. I don't think he's going to play horrible, but I also feel pretty confident that I'm not going to say, man, that was the difference. Like he may come in 38th, and it's just like, okay, that was fine. I'll move on, and I didn't need him. And I just kind of feel that way. I'm almost indifferent to the play, but not worried about him really crushing me either.
Yeah. Tommy Fleetwood, 8,500. I think, obviously you're not going to bet him outright to win, but it's a guy that shows up at these majors and has showed up at US Opens. I think it's a good venue for him. Now, you said building in certain sets. I think Tommy Cam Smith could actually be a good pairing there in some of your lineups.
Definitely. I mean, I love Tommy Fleetwood in all things. He fits a lot of builds. I think Morikawa and him are interesting to sync up. Those type of players. He just fits a lot of builds. He could be your second man into Scheffler, as you mentioned
Yep.
with a couple other guys. He could be your third man in if you start balanced, which I think is pretty interesting. And yes, the outright, I can tell you firsthand, the ROI is negative 100% every week, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have utility in your lineups. He can set the stage for someone else to win and he can not burn you. And that's a huge asset at a US Open.
Yeah. And at this price, you don't need him to win.
No.
And, if you do want to bet, I think a top 10 bet, you probably get pretty good odds. And, he's very likely to come through on that. Just don't watch until Sunday. And then all of a sudden you'll be like, oh, shit, Tommy Fleetwood, top 10.
Yeah, I've been there.
Will Zalatoris, 8,300. Since he's come back from injury, not the same guy, lost a ton of distance, still striking the irons very well, but he's been having way too many blow up holes, terrible around the green. I don't think this is a course where I want to back Zalatoris at all.
Too big of an opportunity cost for me. It's not necessarily that I'm overly concerned about him. It's that I just mentioned I like Fleetwood. And when we get to right now, the lower eights, there's two or three guys right below him that I also have interest in. So he's going to get squeezed by default.
Yeah, absolutely. Fitzpatrick is interesting. It's so hard to get him right because you have no idea what Fitzpatrick's going to show up on any given week. He can miss a cut or come 50th, or he can win a US Open. So I never really know what to do with him. As of right now, I'm not crazy about him. It hasn't been hitting the irons really well. And basically the whole game has been a mess.
Form is definitely concerning. The price is giving you more and more room. Like as we get lower, I'm obviously more apt to take a guy who's all over the map because I know if I get him right, the payoff is immense. Where if he's 10,000, I'm not going to take a huge gamble on a guy. I think Fitzy's getting closer to that. So I have some interest, but there's no denying that week to week and even round to round, it's a very mixed bag of what Fitzpatrick we get.
Yep. Tony Finau, very, very popular this week at the Memorial. I thought he would be a little popular. Didn't think he'd get this popular, but at 8,100, I don't see it being much different at the U.S. Open. Probably going to garner some ownership. Obviously, from a ball striking standpoint, he has been very, very good, but the putting, it just comes down to that. Can he make enough putts to save par and to score when he does have the opportunities?
Definitely, the flat stick at times has capped him. The nice thing, he is analogous to Fleetwood in the sense that he can do a lot for you without needing to do a ton. You know, he can be your third man in, you can be your balance guy, he can come in 12th, he can come in 8th, and you say, "Great, great work, let's move on." He's gonna be popular. I would assume he's cash viable for a lot of people, because I do think he's got a pretty good shot to play decent. He's gonna have to flip that putter if you really wanna tap in to him being on the first page of the leaderboard, though.
Yeah. Matsuyama, 8,000, I think is a great price for him. Now, absolute wild card because he could be contending, or similar to Louis, he could withdraw at any second. Now, I
Correct.
don't see him withdrawing from a US Open, but I do think he'll be popular at this price. I do think that his game fits here. You know, he can strike the ball very well. He's very good around the green, fifth in bogey avoidance, first around the green over the last 24 rounds, good with sand saves. So there's a lot to like with Matsuyama. I do think that if he gets extremely popular, I might go elsewhere. But I think he's actually a candidate for an outright as well. You know, looked like he was dead to start the Memorial and then came back really strong on Friday. So I think he's playing well enough and the numbers pretty good. I think I might make the outright on him with an each way and then maybe get away from him on the DraftKings side.
That's always an option and something that I love to talk about in balancing. You know, you can get exposure to a player in a certain market where it's advantageous, and that's as important as getting the player right. Like, you know, if a guy is way over owned, doesn't mean that he's now going to play bad, but you say, okay, he's a much better bet now, and I'm going to get more upside there, and I'm going to short him maybe in DFS or vice versa. And I think Decky, I know I have interest. I'm not sure where it's going to be. Uh, but yeah, he's just built for this. He seems to be able to make those putts when he needs to, even though I don't regard him as a great putter. But timely putting is something I do regard with him, and the price is right. So I have lineups, I'll tell you right now, that have two or three guys in the 8 to 8,500 range, and then, you know, maybe one above and two below, something like that. I like that balance to attack this range with Decky, Finau, Fitzy, uh, probably not Will Z, but some of those other guys we mentioned as well.
Yeah, and I do think that, you know, the 8K range is going to be popular, but
Yeah.
probably more picking and choosing. People will probably play one or two of them and then dip down to the 6K range, especially with those Scotty builds. So I think if you're building balanced and maybe you're using three of the guys in this range, it actually could differentiate you a little bit.
And I like that. I like to, you know, when most people think of differentiation, I think most people think like I have to find a 1% guy that no one's playing. And it's like,
Yep.
or you could just find a combination of somewhat popular guys that is a weird lineup construction. And
Yeah.
I'm much more apt to try to do that.
Yep. So wanted to really go through a lot of those top guys. Now, once we get down here below 8K, we can kind of pick and choose a little bit more.
Yeah.
Spieth, you know, this is a guy, like I said, not in form. You probably don't want him. The guy can't hit an iron to save his life. But oddly enough, even though he's in terrible form, he's one of the few guys that, if he is low owned, I just think with the magic beans around here, I might actually take a chance and throw him in a couple lineups.
Price for me. That's what does it. I would never back Spieth in the upper nines and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Even if he was
even
in
if he was
form.
8,600, I would
Yeah.
not. Yeah, I'd have no interest.
Just because it's just so tough. But when you get down here, who better than he can just do that? And you're not as taxed if it doesn't happen. So I'm with you there. I don't think it'll take a lot. The guy I got to ask you about, I'm sure you're going to bring him up, but I got to jump the gun, is Thigala. I can never get him right. He is just an immense scorer at Memorial. He was playing pretty well heading into Sunday. What do you do with him at 76? Because I think he could be pretty popular.
Yeah, that's another guy I'm considering. I've bet him a lot this year, and you know he's been flirting in contention a little bit here and there. But It's really, you're right. It's hard to get him right because sometimes he's contending, sometimes he's absolutely terrible. But I do like this setup for him. He's a weird guy too. Like around the green, there's some times where it's like he makes incredible shots that you're like, holy shit. And then there's other times where he's chipping and the ball's coming back to his feet. So it depends on what happens there. But he might be a guy similar to Matsuyama. I might be more interested in the outright and maybe in each way. And if he is extremely popular at this price, because I do think it's a very good price for him, maybe get away from him in DraftKings. But I don't know if I really answered the question, but I do
No.
like him. I just don't know in what aspect yet.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, this 7K range is difficult because there's guys that look like they could be good, but all have warts. I mean, Hatton, I do think it's a good course for him, but if he's all of a sudden behind Wiregrass, is he absolutely screaming and chopping it down with his club? So that's always an aspect. Lowry, you can't trust the putter. Cam Young, you can't trust at all. So I really don't know. This is probably a range that's going to be pretty popular with people, mainly because of Scotty lineups. But I don't know if a lot of them I really am in love with.
Yeah, this is going to be a fascinating because I do think people will try to dip in here. I would assume most will go to Corey Connors because they're going to feel, he does what you want. He makes cuts. He doesn't hurt people. He's a great pairing with Scheffler. To me, that's the prudent play. But right above him, you've got guys like Jason Day, Sam Burns, Dustin Johnson. Like, who is going to them? Maybe nobody. And I don't know if I want to be that person, but at the same time, I do think there are pivots off, Benny on and Connors at the bottom of the range, I would say are the ones that most people are going to be most
Yep.
comfortable with. But I'm not sure those are the biggest upside plays. They may be the best stable plays, but I think you have some flyers right above them.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like Tom Kim, but it's a little
Okay.
concerning what has happened over the weekend at Memorial because he was playing well and then just seemed to fall apart. Sung Jae Im, with a strong weekend, maybe he gets a little bit popular. I think it's a course that could fit him. He's been playing a little bit better lately. He does have, what was it? The Honda has a win on Bermuda grass, so he can putt well on this surface. Maybe in consideration, but a lot of these other guys, it's kind of hard to make a case for him.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, Sanjay, he's been a Justin Thomas pain point for me all year. Where a couple times I've said Sanjay's back, he's got it together, and he certainly does not. And then at Saturday at the Memorial, he was 6-7 under at one point and put together the round of the day. You
Yep.
mentioned Honda; he's got a formula. He'll be there for me. 71. I mean, the last two in that range. I'm not speaking about Ricky. Uh,
No.
Justin Rose comes out of nowhere and then he regresses back to shooting like 15 over.
Yep.
I don't know what to do with him. Probably nothing, to be honest. But yeah, you have names up and down the range, and I think that's the fascinating thing about a U.S. Open: the depth in the lower sevens.
Yeah, and then when we dip down into the sixes here,
Oh
there's three
boy.
guys that there's three guys that I like a lot, and I probably won't be alone. I think Henley is great for here. I think he's good on Donald Ross designs. He's a good putter on Bermuda. I think he's second or third on Bermuda putting. Noren seems to be pretty consistent and safe at 6,900. I love where Keegan Bradley's game is at right now at 6,800. So those are three guys I am definitely interested in. And then once we go down from there, I mean, it's basically close your eyes and hope for the best. What are you thinking in the 6K range?
Yeah, certainly will echo those guys right at the top of that range. They have a formula with a couple different finishes. They're mid sevens, and no one's complaining. Like if Henley was 73 or 7,400 in this field, I wouldn't say what a misprice. I would
Yep.
just say, oh, seems reasonable. I think that depending on, I don't want to say it's fully contingent, but Straka's at 65. If he posts a good Memorial, he's going to be a guy that people will look to. And I get it. He's obviously flashed. And I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, but I do think you have pivots. Uh, Bhatia is another one. I really struggle at times to know what you're going to get. Most likely, I'd say the course probably handles him, but at the same time, he's someone who can score. I really respect that, and he will attack, probably maybe to his detriment at times. And Am I crazy for potentially having Lucas Glover on the list at 64? It's on the
No, because
list.
with his ball striking and he can play around the green. I mean, he's another guy. It's going to come down to the putter,
Putter.
and more often than not, that's going to let you down. But I do think that at the price, there is enough there to go there. So he's probably going to be in the player pool for me. He's hurt me a ton this year. We saw the resurgence last year and looked great with the putter, but he's regressed back to not really being able to make putts. But I do think that he's worth a play here.
And that's
Some other
where
guys. Sorry, go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say that's where that skill set stack is so crucial to me. Like
Yep.
Glover, maybe with some iron players, yes. Bez with some guys like Cam Smith and Bez. Sure, they need neither of them can drive it. I might pair them up and say maybe it won't be as punishing. And then like EVR with off the tee guys, maybe I would look to him. So
Yeah. No, I
yeah,
agree with that. I think Siwoo Kim's a pretty good play here, 6,800. Donald Ross, obviously, he plays well on those, going to live in the fairway. So I think I can get there with him. Billy Horschel's been playing good golf, 6,600. I think I'm okay going there. Aaron Rye is a guy I kind of like on more difficult courses. Another guy that's good with the bogey avoidance. He's going to be in the fairway. And then, mandatory, we got to talk about Tiger. I think this venue is a good venue for the current state of Tiger's game. The problem is he healthy enough to play for 4 rounds?
that's the tricky part. I think for me with Tiger, if I was inclined to make any action on him, it would be more round centric, either
Yep.
showdown
Yep.
or a head to head matchup, because you can get him right and then he can't hold up. And on Sunday, all the currency you built is gone. But in a round matchup or in a head to head or in a showdown format, you might be able to capture a little value because I think there's still some of that for Tiger, but I don't see myself getting to him in full 4 round 72 hole.
Yeah. And one of the things I've been doing is picking and choosing just to get a little exposure to him. Bet him to make the cut.
Yeah, there you go.
Usually, it's at even money, sometimes like plus 110, 120. Just bet him. You have a little Tiger sweat for 2 days, and he ain't going to last through the whole weekend. So as long as he makes the cut, yay. Anybody down in this lower 6K range that sticks out to you before we hop into the fives?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do need to tread lightly here. And this is, I know I'm just repeating it. So apologies, kind of that skill set. Like Mackenzie Hughes and Bez are wizards with the short game. And if you really favor them, you want to put them with Spieth or something. I think they're interesting there. If you want to really punish yourself, I think Grio always makes sense for those type of lineups. Obviously, his short game can gobble him up quickly. I just don't see a lot down here. The beauty is, I would say pretty much anyone, even like a Victor Perez who might get a little steam, is not going to be crazy popular. They're going to be Scheffler attachments and kind of last man in.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we dip down a little bit further, not a ton of guys that I'm crazy about. David Puig, playing well on live right now, currently tied for the lead. I'm hoping that he doesn't win because I also bet Paul Casey, so he's also tied for the league. But I think Puig is a very, I think he's a talented golfer, and maybe he's not ready for the majors yet, especially only playing on live. But at 5,900, I think it's a good price for him. I can maybe make a case for him. Adam Schenk, I think, is a guy that I can possibly get to. There's not a ton in the 5K that I like, which kind of scares me about Scotty lineups, but definitely going to have to dig in and look a little bit more at these names. But I mean, a lot of these are basically just creative players that you probably don't
Yep.
want to rely on.
I hear that. You got to be pretty careful, and I'm with you. I think when I get to the fives, my philosophy has always just been I'm not going to even look for a well-rounded player. Can they do one thing as good as the top end? And can I capture that? Their game doesn't work, but they're the best driver in the range. They're the best
Yep.
putter in the range. And with Puig, he's clearly the best talent in the range. He's a 22-year-old kid. He could be 9,000 in majors in a couple years. He has that
I
talent.
could see it.
Whereas,
Yeah, absolutely.
some of these guys, no disrespect, like Matt Kuchar is not going to suddenly have a resurgence. He is who he is. We've seen it for many, many years. And so I would rather blindly back an unknown and say I'm betting on pure talent than take someone that I think the range of outcomes is limited. So you've got Shank, you've got Puig. Uh, like Dunlap to me is another one. I think you could bet blindly on talent. Probably too early, but maybe. I don't see much down here though.
Yeah,
It's bad.
it's pretty slim pickings. One guy, maybe, I mean, not in the 5K, but six flat, Brendan Todd, possibly an okay course for him. Not really someone you necessarily want to back in a major, but compared to a lot of these guys in the area, I don't think it's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, Todd, to his credit, he has a formula. Like he plays how he plays, and he knows what he's doing. He knows his game. Sometimes it translates, sometimes it doesn't. But if he survives off the tee, I mean, once he gets to the green, he's better than most down there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think that was a pretty good preview of the course and going through all these players. Any final thoughts? What you're looking for on the week? Maybe some things you want to look at before you make some final decisions.
No, I think for me, what I always try to do is what we just did is get the broad strokes. I have some buckets of players. Then I refine tee times, the waves, little things. I'm not going to revamp everything I just did, but if I'm 50-50 on two players, one's with the wave that I want, or one has the slightly better draw, maybe that pushes it over the edge. And for me, once you do that, you kind of throw them together, leave a little money on the table if you want to be extra cautious about not being duped, particularly in the large field contests, and then just try to survive to the weekend and give yourself a chance to really get lucky. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for joining, Ben. Greatly appreciated. I think that was a lot of fun. We went through a lot there. So let them know where to find you.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Of course, I'll be over at Stochastic and Odd Shopper, respectively for DFS and betting content. Always welcome to hop over. Doing a lot of fun things over there, and it's just a great time for the whole community. I couldn't be more excited for it, and I hope some people watching have some big success. So we'll do it again soon, man. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Good luck at the US Open. So that's going to do it for this week. As always, thank you for listening. Check out thehelmsports.com. By the time I have this out, probably going to have my huge preview article up over there, basically breaking down the course. And I've broken down the top 24 in pricing, basically everybody $7,500 and up on DraftKings. Quick little recap of what they've been doing this year, some major history where they're looking statistically. So basically all that'll be up there on thehelmsports.com. So check that out. Sign up for the newsletter, Substack, The Helm Sports. I will have a quick little research newsletter coming out. And then on Wednesday will be all my final thoughts and basically player pool, breakdown of all that good stuff, all the wagers. But that's going to do it for this week. Really excited for another major. Hopefully we can smash. But thank you for listening. I am your host, Derek Helm. And remember,
just have fun out there.